21 million people crowd Manila's metropolitan sprawl today. Traffic chokes elevated motorways. Jeepneys weave through crowds beneath glass towers. But beneath this chaos lies something unexpected. 5,000 years of human presence and the birthplace of the first truly global economy. This video uses AI-generated visuals based on historical research to reconstruct Manila's lost landscapes. The images are interpretive. Small inconsistencies may appear, but they allow us to see what photography never captured and what fire, war, and concrete buried. From Neolithic fishing communities on the Pasig River delta, through a fortified Islamic trading port that moved Chinese silk and Moluccan spices, to the Spanish walled city that became the western anchor of a trade route stretching across the Pacific to Mexico and onward to Europe. Manila connected 3 continents before steam engines existed. Chinese merchants lived alongside Mexican soldiers. Japanese Christians fled persecution to its shores. Silver from Peruvian mines paid for Chinese porcelain that furnished European palaces, all passing through Manila's harbour. Then came American grid plans, Japanese occupation, and the second worst destruction of any Allied capital in the Second World War. What emerged from the ruins became one of Asia's densest, most complex cities. This is its story. The rock face at Angano bears the scars of ancient hands. Carved sometime around 3000 BC, these petroglyphs mark the earliest human presence in the region, abstract figures etched into volcanic tuff, their meaning lost to time. The artists who made them are long gone, but they stood here on the same sweltering coastal plain where Manila would eventually rise. For millennia, Negrito peoples moved through the forests of Luzon. Small in stature, dark-skinned hunter-gatherers who knew every ridge and river. They left no cities, no monuments, just the faint echo of their languages in place names, absorbed syllable by syllable as new arrivals came across the water. The Malayo-Polynesians brought boats. They brought rice. They brought the language that would become Tagalog. Settlement by settlement, they established villages along river mouths and coastlines, displacing or assimilating the older inhabitants. By the 12th century, complex polities had formed along the Pasig River's banks. One of them, Tondo, controlled the northern shore, the other, Manila, fortified the southern. The name came from the plants. Indigo-yielding shrubs grew thick in the tidal flats. Manila, from the Sanskrit word for the deep blue dye traders sought. Some claim it was the nilad plant instead, a mangrove shrub with white flowers, but the result was the same. A trading post on muddy ground protected by wooden palisades where merchant junks could anchor. By 1258, Manila had become something more substantial, a fortified settlement governed by rajas who commanded both trade and tribute. Chinese ceramics piled up in storehouses, Song dynasty, porcelain, Yuan Celadon, Ming blue and white. The South China Sea was not a barrier but a highway, and Manila sat at a crucial junction. Then came Brunei. Hindu warriors from Borneo invaded in the 12th century, bringing with them the Malay concept of kingship and Sanskrit statecraft. The settlement they called Mali Lu fell under their influence. When Brunei converted to Islam generations later, the faith followed the same trade routes. By the 15th century, Manila's elite had adopted the new religion. Mosques replaced older shrines. The ruling families intermarried with Brunei's sultans, Raja Matanda, who would govern Manila in the 16th century, could trace his lineage directly to Sultan Bolkiah of Brunei. Political marriages bound the coastal polities into a loose network of alliance and competition. Trade goods flowed north to China, south to the Spice Islands, west across the Bay of Bengal. When Spanish galleons appeared on the horizon in 1570, Manila was neither primitive nor isolated. It was a Muslim trading hub with diplomatic ties stretching across maritime Southeast Asia, its storehouses filled with Chinese silk and Moluccan cloves. The wooden fort stood ready. Raja Suleiman commanded its defences. What came next would erase this world completely. On the 24th of June 1571, Miguel López de Legazpi's fleet dropped anchor in Manila Bay. The wooden palisades of Manila stood against the morning light, flags bearing Arabic script visible above the fortifications. Raja Suleiman commanded the settlement's defenders. The battle at Bangkusai Channel lasted hours. By afternoon, the Raja lay dead. The Sultanate's northern outpost had fallen. What Legazpi built on those ruins was unlike anything Southeast Asia had seen. He drew inspiration not from Asian models, but from 8 centuries of Iberian struggle, the Reconquista's architecture of conquest. Where Manila's bamboo and hardwood had stood, Spanish masons laid volcanic tuff foundations. Intramuros rose stone by stone, 7 bastions, curtain walls thick enough to absorb cannon fire. The new city enclosed 16 hectares. Within its gates stood government houses, churches, convents. Beyond the walls, districts emerged, Binondo for Chinese merchants, Ermita, named for a Mexican hermit priest, Tondo, where the old Hindu polity's descendants remained. The city answered not to Madrid, but to Mexico City. Manila became a suffragan of the Archdiocese of Mexico by papal decree. Its garrison included 400 Native American soldiers from Tlaxcala, granted pensions for their service half a world from home. This was New Spain's western edge, governance flowing across the Pacific rather than around the Cape. Then came the galleons. 2 or 3 ships each year, their holds packed with Mexican and Peruvian silver, crossing 8,000 kilometers of open ocean to reach Manila. Chinese junks arrived laden with silk. Indonesian vessels carried spices from the Moluccas. Indian traders brought gems and textiles. The silver flowed west, the goods flowed east. For the first time, a single trade route connected 3 continents in sustained commercial exchange. Europe's manufactures, Africa's resources, America's precious metals, Asia's luxuries, all met in Manila's harbour. The human convergence matched the commercial one. By 1603, 25,000 Chinese lived in and around the city. 14,000 native families remained. 3,500 Spanish-Filipino mixed families had formed. Japanese traders walked streets alongside Arab merchants. African slaves brought from New Spain lived beside Armenian intermediaries. Portuguese adventurers, fugitives from Macau, found refuge here. Jesuit priests recorded the confessional's linguistic complexity. Mass conducted in multiple languages, confessions heard in tongues from 3 continents. The Ming Empire had banned direct Japanese-Chinese trade in 1549. Manila became the sole port where merchants from both nations could meet openly. Silver from Potosi purchased silk from Suzhou. Samurai swords traded for Mindanao pearls. Armenian kojas facilitated transactions between European capital and Asian goods. In 1721, 1,000 iron bars financed through French-Armenian partnership, a precursor to later colonial finance networks. This was not gradual cultural blending. 3 civilizations, Asian Maritime, Iberian Catholic, indigenous Tagalog, collided within Intramuros' walls. The fusion was neither peaceful nor equal, but it was unprecedented. For the first time, a city existed where a Mexican soldier might guard Chinese merchants trading Japanese silver for Gujarati cotton, all under Spanish law derived from Castilian codes, in a settlement built on Tagalog land. The world had not seen this configuration before. It would define Manila for centuries. By the middle of the 18th century, Manila had become indispensable. Silver from Mexico flowed through its warehouses. Chinese silks, Indian textiles, and spices from the Moluccas passed through its gates. The galleon trade had made the city wealthy, and that wealth drew attention. In October 1762, British warships appeared in Manila Bay. The 7 Years' War had reached the Pacific. After a brief siege, Intramuros fell. British forces occupied the fortress city, raising their flag over the governor's palace. It looked like a conquest. It was not. Beyond the walls, Spanish authority persisted. British troops controlled Intramuros, but could not push into the provinces. Filipino and Spanish forces fought guerrilla actions in the countryside. The occupation became a stalemate. British commanders soon realized they held a fortress in a hostile archipelago, supplied by ships sailing halfway around the world. The occupation lasted 20 months. In 1764, under the Treaty of Paris, Britain withdrew. Indian sepoys who had served with British forces deserted rather than return, settling in nearby towns where their descendants remain. The Chinese population of Binondo, suspected of collaboration, faced retribution. Spanish cannons in Intramuros, which had always pointed toward the Chinatown district, stayed where they were. Inside the walls, life resumed its insular pattern. 1,200 pure Spanish families lived within Intramuros, maintaining a society transplanted from Europe. 400 Spanish troops garrisoned the fortress. But the real military strength came from across the Pacific. In 1787, the French explorer La Pérouse recorded 1,300 Mexican soldiers stationed at Manila, with additional detachments at Cavite and Ermita. These troops had been arriving for generations, 900 in 1603, over 700 in 1670. Manila's defense depended on men born in Mexico City, Puebla, and Veracruz, serving a Spanish crown an ocean away. The city remained tethered to Mexico until 1821, when Mexican independence severed that administrative link. For 2.5 centuries, Manila had been governed not from Madrid, but from across the Pacific, a Pacific city within a transatlantic empire. The British occupation had proven something essential. Manila was more than Intramuros. Spanish power extended beyond stone walls into networks of loyalty, trade, and military force that could not be broken by a temporary conquest. If this journey through Manila's past resonates with you, consider becoming a channel member. Your support helps me keep rebuilding lost cities, frame by frame. For 250 years, Manila answered to a viceroy who sat 15,000 kilometers away in Mexico City. Every order, every reform, every administrative decision traveled by galleon across the Pacific, subject to the rhythms of monsoons and the whims of privateers. Then, in 1821, Mexico won its independence. Overnight, the chain of command snapped. Madrid assumed direct control. What followed was unprecedented. Banks opened. Factories rose along the Pasig. Universities expanded. In a few decades, Manila experienced more institutional growth than in the previous 2 centuries combined. The rhythm of governance quickened. Where orders once took 18 months to cross an ocean, they now arrived in weeks, then days. The old insularity began to crack. Indigenous peoples from outlying provinces arrived seeking work. Chinese merchants expanded their networks beyond Binon Do. Indians opened textile shops. Arabs traded in spices. Africans, Malays, Papuans, Europeans, Latinos, the city absorbed them all. Wealth bred a new class, the ilustrado. Educated, literate in Spanish, conversant with European philosophy. They read Rousseau, debated liberalism, and began to ask uncomfortable questions about who governed and why. In 1823, a captain named Andres Novales attempted a coup. He was no Spaniard. He was one of many Latin American officers, men from Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Costa Rica, who had fought in independence wars and found themselves demoted under the new arrangement. His revolt failed. He was executed. But the idea remained, if they could do it, why not us? Then came 1869. The Suez Canal opened. Ships that once spent months rounding Africa now cut straight through Egypt. Manila Bay, already vital, became a direct terminus for European vessels. Letters that took a year now arrived in 6 weeks. Ideas travelled faster, so did machinery. Telegraph cables followed steamships. The city began to pulse with a different frequency. The wealthier it grew, the more visible the contradictions became. An educated class with no political voice, a colonial apparatus enriching itself while imposing restrictions on local enterprise. The Ilustrados organized, they published, they petitioned. When petitions failed, some turned to revolution. In 1896, the Philippine Revolution ignited. Manila was among the first 8 provinces to take up arms, each represented by a ray on the new republic's flag. The city that had been a node in Spain's global empire now became the crucible of its unravelling. The canal that brought prosperity also brought scrutiny. As steamships multiplied, so did foreign attention. European powers circled. American warships appeared on the horizon. Manila had spent 3 centuries as a distant outpost of empire. Now it stood exposed, wealthy, restless and coveted, on the brink of a new century that would bring occupation, devastation and rebirth. On the 13th of August 1898, American shells tore through the walls of Intramuros. Spain had held Manila for 327 years. The battle lasted a single afternoon. The city changed hands in a ceremony conducted without Filipino representatives present. Spanish Governor General Fermín Jaudenes surrendered directly to American forces. The treaty excluded the Philippine revolutionaries who had been fighting Spain for 2 years. The First Philippine Republic, governing from Bulacan province, rejected the transfer. Filipino forces under AEHMI o Agi NAHL fought American troops through Manila's suburbs. The conflict spread across Luzon, villages burned, supply lines collapsed. By March 1901, American forces had pushed deep into the northern provinces. Agi NAHL was captured that month in Palanan. He returned to Manila and signed a Pledge of Allegiance to the United States on the 1st of April 1901 from his residence at Malacañang Palace. The Republic effectively ceased to exist. 4 months later, on the 31st of July, Manila became the first chartered city in the Philippine Islands. Act No. 183 of the Philippine Commission redrew administrative boundaries. 11 municipal districts formed the new city limits: Binondo, Ermita, Intramuros, Malate, Paco, Pandacan, Sampaloc, San Miguel, Santa Ana, Santa Cruz, and Tondo. The colonial capital now answered to an American Governor-General. William Howard Taft, head of the insular government, wanted Manila transformed. He invited the architect Daniel Burnham to survey the city in 1904. Burnham had redesigned Chicago after its fire. He believed cities should inspire civic pride through grand public spaces. The plan Burnham delivered in 1905 proposed a complete reimagining. Diagonal arteries would cut through the colonial street grid, radiating from a new government centre. This civic complex would rise on Wallace Field, stretching from what became Taft Avenue eastward to Rizal Park. A central lagoon would reflect a domed Philippine Capitol building facing Manila Bay. The monument to Ho C.H. Rizal would anchor the opposite end. Parks and waterways featured throughout the design. The City Beautiful movement valued ordered nature within urban spaces. Burnham envisioned Manila as a tropical Washington. Construction began slowly. The legislative building rose first, its neoclassical columns facing the planned lagoon. The finance and agricultural department buildings followed, but the grand capital never came. Funding stalled, priorities shifted. The diagonal boulevards remained lines on paper. By 1941, only 3 structures stood completed from Burnham's vision. The Civic Centre remained a field. The waterways stayed undredged. Manila had begun its transformation into an American city, but would not finish. The blueprint existed. The foundations were laid. Then the world caught fire again, and different priorities took hold. On the 24th of December 1941, the last American soldiers withdrew from Manila. They took their equipment, their vehicles, their heavy guns. Within 48 hours, every military installation had been dismantled or abandoned. General Douglas MacArthur made his declaration on the 26th. Manila was now an open city. Under international law, this meant surrender without resistance, no defending troops, no military targets. In exchange, the attacking force was obliged to spare the civilian population and the city's infrastructure. The Japanese warplanes continued bombing anyway. Fires spread through the northern districts. Civilians sheltered in basements and churches. The law meant nothing when the attackers chose to ignore it. On the 2nd of January 1942, Japanese forces entered Manila without opposition. The occupation began quietly. For 3 years, the city endured shortages, curfews, and the steady erosion of its colonial institutions. American and Filipino prisoners marched to camps. Commerce slowed. The Spanish walls of Intramuros still stood, but the city inside them changed daily. Then came February 1945. American forces landed south of Manila Bay. MacArthur had promised to return, and now he was making good on that promise. But Japanese Rear Admiral Sahenji Iwabuchi had no intention of surrendering. Despite orders from his superiors to abandon the city, he fortified Intramuros and prepared for a final stand. His sailors and marines barricaded themselves inside government buildings, schools, and churches. They turned the walled city into a fortress. What followed lasted exactly 1 month. From the 3rd of February to the 3rd of March, Manila became a killing ground. American artillery pounded Japanese positions. Japanese forces executed civilians in churches, hospitals, and homes. Entire families were bayoneted in basements. Women were raped and murdered. The violence was systematic and deliberate. By the time the smoke cleared, approximately 100,000 Filipino civilians lay dead. The destruction was architectural as well as human. Intramuros, which had survived earthquakes, fires, and British occupation, was reduced to rubble. The Baroque churches that had stood for 3 centuries collapsed under shellfire. The stone buildings along the Pasig River burned. The graceful wooden houses of the American period splintered and fell. Block by block, the city that Daniel Burnham had reimagined ceased to exist. When the war ended, Manila held a grim distinction. It was the second most destroyed Allied capital after Warsaw. Entire neighbourhoods had been erased. Of Intramuros, only fragments remained, sections of wall, a few church facades, scattered foundations. The national artist Nick Joaquin would later write that Manila was a city of layers, each one destroyed and buried before the next could rise. The war had compressed centuries into ash. The irony was brutal. MacArthur had declared Manila an open city to save it. Instead, it became the site of one of the Pacific Theatre's bloodiest urban battles. The decision to spare the city had merely delayed its annihilation by 3 years. By March 1945, there was almost nothing left to spare. The rubble was still warm when the rebuilding began. City Hall rose first, then the Legislative Building, then the Manila Post Office, new walls over scorched foundations. But something fundamental had shifted. In 1948, President Elpidio Quirino moved the seat of government north to K.H.'s own city. The Burnham Plan, drawn up with such confidence half a century earlier, was quietly shelved. The ceremonial heart he had envisioned at Luneta would never fully materialize. In 1952, Ahasich ni o Lacson became Manila's first elected mayor. For a decade, the city reclaimed some of its old luster. The phrase Pearl of the Orient appeared in newspapers again. Then came Metro Manila, created by presidential decree in November 1975, absorbing 4 cities and 13 towns into a single administrative sprawl. Imelda Marcos was appointed its first governor, but martial law had already cast its shadow. Political detainees filled prisons, at least 70,000 arrests, 11,000 cases of torture officially documented. Student journalist Lili Osa Hile Eikyo died in custody in April 1973. The list grew longer. Then in February 1986, 2 million people gathered along EDSA. The Marcos family fled to Honolulu on the 26th. The years that followed brought rapid mayoral turnover. Alfredo Lim, the first Chinese Filipino to hold the office. Lito Atienza's Buhay Yinahang Maynilay campaign. Joseph Estrada's contested legacy. In 2012, a 49-story tower rose behind Rizal Park, blocking the monument's sightlines. Critics called it Terror de Manila. In 2017, a statue commemorating comfort women on Roxas Boulevard caused Japanese diplomatic protests. Today, nearly 2 million people live within Manila's 42 square kilometres. Glass towers crowd the skyline. Reclamation projects advance into the bay despite presidential suspensions. The city ranks 34th globally for culture, 79th as a financial centre. Heritage advocates fight developers. Traffic strangles streets. Daniel Burnham once imagined wide and tree-lined. Manila endures, dense, contested, layered with ghosts beneath the glass.